For centuries, the British Empire ruled over lands filled with wonders and secrets. But what if I told you that some of its most valuable treasures and strange artifacts were lost? Forever. Today, we uncover the mysteries the history books couldn't solve. What happened to these relics? And do they hold the keys to lost worlds? Welcome back to your channel name, the place where history meets mystery. In today's video, we journey deep into the heart of the British Empire to uncover the most baffling mysteries, strange artifacts, lost cities, and relics that defy explanation. These are the stories historians still puzzle over, and by the end of this video, you might have your own theory about what really happened. Imagine this. The British Empire at its height controlled nearly a quarter of the world's landmass, stretching across continents, oceans, and centuries. It wasn't just an empire of soldiers and governors. It was a vast collector of cultures, treasures, and secrets. From the deserts of Egypt to the dense jungles of India, from the unexplored interiors of Africa to the temples of Southeast Asia, the empire touched lands filled with ancient wonders and long-forgotten civilizations. Everywhere it went, it left behind stories, some documented, some told in whispers, and many buried beneath the weight of time. But what happens when history doesn't give us all the answers? What happens when records vanish, artifacts disappear, and entire pieces of the puzzle are missing? That's the mystery we're diving into today. Because while the British Empire gave us libraries of documents, maps, and artifacts, it also left behind mysteries so strange and unsolved that even today, historians and archaeologists argue over them. These are not just tales of lost gold or missing treasure. They're stories of objects with unknown origin, cities swallowed by jungles, artifacts that seem to defy technology of their time, and discoveries that were made and then lost again before the world could truly understand their meaning. And here's where the problem begins. The empire spanned so far and collected so much that it became almost impossible to keep track of everything. In some cases, items were taken back to Britain, displayed in museums, and then suddenly vanished from record. In other cases, explorers wrote about strange ruins deep in colonies, describing carvings, statues, or entire temples unlike anything seen before, and yet no one can find them today. Were these exaggerations? Were they real sites now lost to nature? Or were some things deliberately hidden away? Perhaps because their secrets were too controversial, too strange, or too valuable to reveal. As we dig into this topic, we're not just talking about missing objects or forgotten sites. We're re-uncovering a bigger mystery. Why are there so many unanswered questions surrounding the empire's history? Take, for instance, the stories of the Indian treasures carried off during the colonial era. Some of these treasures were documented, but others are only mentioned in letters and journals, their existence debated even now. Or think about the rumors of strange artifacts from Africa, described in Victorian-era writings as out of place or not matching any known culture. And yet, today, no one can trace them. Were these real finds or just tales to impress readers back in London? But here is the most intriguing part. Every time we think we've found all there is to know about the empire, new discoveries raise more questions than answers. For example, explorers in the late 19th century claimed to have stumbled upon ruins in remote areas of Africa that suggested entire lost civilizations, places that didn't appear on any map. Their writings describe stone cities and strange carvings, but when modern archaeologists go looking, they find either nothing, or clues so faint that it's impossible to be sure what really stood there. And then there are the artifacts whose purposes no one can fully explain, items that don't quite fit with the timeline of human progress as we understand it. Objects pulled from ancient ruins during the empire's expansion that seem almost too advanced for the societies credited with building them, or so the stories go. Were these myths invented by colonial writers to create an air of mystery around their discoveries, or is there truly something unexplained hiding in the empire's history? This is the problem we're setting out to solve. Not every artifact can be traced, not every ruin has been mapped, and not every story checks out with what we know today. Yet the mystery remains because so many clues lie scattered across continents, locked away in archives, or lost to time altogether. And until we start piecing these mysteries together, we're left with tantalizing questions about what the empire found, what it kept, and what it might have quietly buried forever. To truly understand the mysteries surrounding the British Empire, we need to step back for a moment and look at the empire itself. At its height in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the British Empire was unlike anything the world had ever seen before. It was not just large, it was vast beyond imagination. It stretched from the sun-scorched deserts of Egypt to the teeming ports of India, from the remote Pacific Islands to the frozen corners of Canada. Historians like to say that the sun never set on the British Empire, and that wasn't just a poetic phrase. At any given moment, somewhere in the world, a red flag bearing the Union Jack fluttered in the wind, marking yet another piece of territory under British control. But the empire was more than lines on a map. It was a living, breathing network of people, ideas, technologies, and yes, mysteries. As British explorers, traders, soldiers, and officials spread across continents, they didn't just conquer. They also observed, collected, and documented the worlds they entered. They encountered cultures that were thousands of years old, societies with myths and traditions stretching back into prehistory, and landscapes dotted with ruins and relics no one could fully explain. They sent back reports of temples swallowed by jungles, inscriptions carved in unknown scripts, treasures buried under centuries of dust, and artifacts unlike anything found in Britain itself. Now imagine the sheer scale of what this meant. Victorian museums and private collections swelled with artifacts from every corner of the empire. There were Egyptian mummies carried back from the Nile Valley, marble statues from ancient Greece, jewels from India's royal courts, and mysterious tools pulled from long-forgotten ruins in Africa and Southeast Asia. For the British public back home, this was a window into exotic worlds they could only read about in newspapers and serialized adventure stories. But for historians and archaeologists, it created something else entirely, a puzzle with far too many missing pieces. You see, the empire operated at a time when archaeology itself was still in its infancy. In many cases, soldiers and explorers stumbled across ruins or treasures with little understanding of what they had found. They documented what they saw, sometimes sketching maps or writing vivid descriptions, but lacked the training or technology to fully preserve or study these sites. And when these records eventually made their way back to Britain, they often raised more questions than they answered. Was that strange idol described in a colonial officer's letter real? Or was it a misunderstanding of local culture? Did the explorers actually find an ancient lost city in the African interior? Or had they exaggerated their tale to impress readers and secure more funding for future expeditions? This was the paradox of the empire's reach. The more ground it covered, the more mysteries it seemed to uncover. Some of the finds were well documented and preserved in famous institutions like the British Museum, where they still sit today behind glass. Others, though, simply vanished from records altogether. Shipments were lost at sea, private collectors hoarded artifacts that disappeared into dusty attics, and entire sites were left unexcavated as political priorities shifted and wars broke out. The problem was made even worse by the sheer diversity of the empire's territories. Each region had its own languages, its own historical records, and its own oral traditions. A strange stone carving found in the jungles of Burma might have one explanation from local elders, another from colonial administrators, and yet another from European scholars trying to fit it into their own version of history. In the process, truths became blurred, legends grew, and the line between fact and mystery began to fade. It's important to remember, too, that the British Empire existed during an age of curiosity mixed with ambition. Explorers weren't just looking for knowledge. They were also seeking glory, wealth, and the thrill of discovery. This meant that some reports were sensationalized, written, to captivate Victorian audiences hungry for tales of adventure in far-off lands. Newspapers loved stories about cursed tombs, strange artifacts, or mysterious civilizations lurking in unexplored territories, and so these tales spread quickly even when the evidence behind them was thin. Over time, myths and facts began to intertwine so closely that separating them became nearly impossible. And this is where the historical background becomes so important to our story. because it explains why so many mysteries from the British Empire remain unsolved even today. The empire was vast, the discoveries were countless, and the record-keeping was inconsistent at best. Some clues survived in letters, journals, or museum archives, while others were lost entirely as decades passed and empires crumbled. The result is a historical legacy filled with tantalizing hints that may or may not exist, artifacts whose origins remain unclear, and stories passed down with just enough detail to keep us wondering what really happened. When we talk about the British Empire's greatest mysteries, we're not dealing with just one lost city or a single missing artifact. We're looking at a web of enigmas scattered across continents, each with its own story, its own clues, and its own unanswered questions. These mysteries range from objects pulled out of the earth with no clear origin to entire ruins described in colonial-era reports but never seen again. Some were carefully documented before vanishing into private collections. Others appeared in old letters or diaries with just enough detail to spark debates among historians centuries later. Together, they form a picture of an empire that stumbled upon secrets far older than itself, secrets it could never fully explain. One of the most intriguing examples comes from India, where the British encountered artifacts and temples dating back thousands of years. In some cases, the carvings and inscriptions they found were so advanced and precise that early scholars couldn't believe they were the work of ancient civilizations. Stories spread of strange metallic objects unearthed near temple sites, some described as being unlike anything known at the time. Were they simply ceremonial tools made by long-forgotten craftsmen, or were they something else entirely, something that didn't fit neatly into the historical timeline? These questions were often left unanswered as the empire moved on, focused more on ruling than on unraveling the deeper mysteries of the lands it controlled. Then there were the reports from Africa. Victorian explorers wrote about ruined cities hidden deep in the interior, places like Great Zimbabwe, whose towering stone walls baffled Europeans when they first saw them. Early colonial writers often speculated wildly, claiming these ruins might have been built by some lost tribe from ancient Israel or even survivors of Atlantis. These theories sound absurd today, products of the empire's refusal to credit African civilizations with such achievements. But they reveal something else too, the sense of mystery these ruins inspired. Even now, archaeologists debate certain aspects of Great Zimbabwe's history, including how such massive stone structures were built without mortar and what role the city played in regional trade networks centuries ago. In the deserts of Egypt, the British dug up mummies, statues, and fragments of temples, but also encountered objects that didn't seem to fit the standard narrative of Egyptian history. Some colonial records mention small artifacts with designs or symbols no one could translate, items that vanished into private collections before they could be studied properly. Were they simple variations of known Egyptian styles, or did they hint at influences from cultures we haven't fully identified? The mystery lingers because so many of these artifacts disappeared into the hands of collectors, whose estates later scattered their possessions without proper documentation. And then there are the lost cities that became legends. Explorers in Burma, for instance, told tales of entire temple complexes hidden in dense jungles, places where locals spoke of curses and treasures guarded by spirits. Some of these sites were eventually found, like the incredible city of Bagan with its thousands of temples, but others were never confirmed. Diaries from British officers mention crumbling stone statues and overgrown ruins glimpsed during military campaigns. Yet modern researchers searching those same regions find no trace of them. Did the jungle simply reclaim these places so completely that they vanished? Or were some of these stories exaggerated to thrill readers back in London? One mystery that often comes up in discussions of the British Empire involves artifacts that seem technologically advanced for their time. A few colonial-era reports describe objects made of metal alloys or crafted with techniques supposedly unknown to the local cultures of the period. For example, there are references to finely wrought tools or ornaments found in sites dating back centuries, leading to speculation about ancient trade networks or even lost knowledge passed down through generations. Without the artifacts themselves, many of which were lost or misplaced, we were left with only tantalizing descriptions in old documents, fueling endless debates among historians and archaeologists. Even more puzzling are the items tied to legends rather than confirmed history. Take the tales of treasures removed from Indian palaces during the empire's expansion: golden statues, jewel-encrusted thrones, weapons said to carry curses. Some, like the famous Koh-i-Noor diamond, ended up in Britain and can still be seen today. Others simply disappeared, leaving behind rumors of secret vaults and missing shipments lost at sea. Were they stolen and hidden away by private collectors? Destroyed during wars and uprisings? Or do they still lie buried somewhere, waiting to be found centuries later? The same questions surround manuscripts and maps taken from various parts of the empire. Some accounts speak of ancient texts discovered in monasteries or temples, writings in languages scholars couldn't read, hinting at histories far older than the colonial presence. A few of these documents made their way into European libraries, but many others are mentioned once in letters or reports before vanishing completely. If even a fraction of these texts contain genuine historical records, their loss represents not just a missing artifact, but an entire missing chapter of human knowledge. And perhaps the most haunting mysteries are the ones tied to explorers themselves. There are cases where British officers claim to have found strange ruins or artifacts, only to die on the journey back or lose their records in shipwrecks and uprisings. All we have are secondhand accounts, fragments of stories, about discoveries that might have changed our understanding of history if only they had survived intact. When it comes to the British Empire's most mysterious artifacts and lost worlds, the questions that remain are often bigger than the answers we've managed to find. Historians, archaeologists, and treasure hunters have spent decades trying to piece together what really happened to these relics, ruins, and ancient secrets. But for every clue uncovered, new puzzles seem to emerge. The result is a tangle of competing theories, some grounded in hard evidence, others drifting into the realm of speculation, and all of them fueling debates that continue to this day. One of the most common theories is that many of these mysteries simply come down to the Empire's own chaotic record-keeping. The British Empire was vast, spanning continents and ruling over hundreds of millions of people. Artifacts were collected in the middle of wars. Archaeological digs were interrupted by rebellions or political upheavals. And entire shipments of treasures crossed oceans at a time when storms and shipwrecks were an ever-present danger. It's easy to imagine priceless artifacts disappearing not because of conspiracy or secrecy, but simply because they were lost in the shuffle of history. A single misfiled document, a ship sinking in the Indian Ocean, a private collector hoarding his acquisitions without cataloging them, these small events could easily erase entire chapters of the past before anyone realized their importance. But that explanation doesn't satisfy everyone, because some mysteries seem too deliberate to be accidents. Take the stories of artifacts removed from temples or palaces in India, Burma, or Africa, objects described in vivid detail by soldiers or travelers but never seen again. Some researchers believe these items ended up in private collections belonging to wealthy British families, passed down through generations in secrecy. Even today, auction houses occasionally reveal stunning pieces of colonial-era treasure resurfacing after decades in private hands, raising the question of how many more remain hidden in manor houses. Attics or vaults, their existence known only to a few descendants who have no idea of their historical significance. Then there are the theories suggesting that some mysteries were deliberately covered up because they didn't fit the narratives of the time. The British Empire, like many colonial powers, often viewed history through a Eurocentric lens, downplaying or ignoring evidence of advanced civilizations in the lands they controlled. When explorers in Africa or Asia reported ruins or artifacts suggesting highly sophisticated ancient societies, their findings were sometimes dismissed or reinterpreted to fit colonial-era assumptions. Could it be that certain discoveries were quietly buried because they challenged the empire's preferred version of history? Some scholars think so, pointing to early reports of sites that vanished from records after initial mentions, leaving only tantalizing clues behind. Others take the mystery even further, speculating about the artifacts themselves. A recurring theme in colonial-era writings involves objects that seem technologically or artistically ahead of their time. tools crafted with techniques unknown to local cultures' inscriptions. No one could translate or architectural feats that didn't match what historians believed those societies were capable of. Were these misunderstandings by Victorian explorers eager to sensationalize their discoveries? Or could some of these objects point to genuinely lost knowledge from ancient civilizations? A few fringe theories even suggest connections to vanished continents like Atlantis or forgotten global trade networks stretching back thousands of years, though mainstream historians remain skeptical of such ideas. The fate of lost cities raises similar questions. When colonial officers wrote about temple complexes swallowed by jungles or stone cities hidden in remote deserts, were they describing real places that have since been reclaimed by nature, or were some of these tales exaggerated to secure funding, fame, or political backing? Modern satellite technology has revealed entire archaeological sites buried under vegetation or sand, proving that some mythical cities did exist after all. Yet others remain elusive despite repeated searches, leaving open the possibility that they either never existed as described or still lie undiscovered in some of the world's most remote regions. Even the mystery of missing manuscripts continues to spark debate. Reports of ancient texts taken from monasteries or temples hint at histories and languages we no longer possess. Some may have been destroyed during wars or uprisings, while others could still sit unnoticed in European libraries or private collections, misfiled and forgotten. Every so often, a discovery emerges: an old trunk in a university archive, a neglected bundle of papers in a private estate, reminding us that history sometimes survives in the unlikeliest of places. It makes historians wonder how many more such treasures remain hidden, holding answers to questions we haven't even thought to ask yet. And hovering over all these theories is the simple fact that the British Empire ended before many of its mysteries could be fully explored. As colonies gained independence and imperial, archives were scattered, countless records were lost, destroyed, or locked away in bureaucratic vaults. Some believe that secret files in British archives might still hold clues about lost artifacts or undiscovered ruins, waiting for the right historian to piece them together. Others argue that the real answers lie far from London, in the landscapes where these mysteries began, in the jungles of Southeast Asia, the deserts of Africa, the mountains of India, places where modern technology might one day uncover what colonial explorers only glimpsed centuries ago. So here we are, after journeying through the vast reaches of the British Empire, following the trail of lost artifacts, forgotten ruins, and unanswered questions that refuse to stay buried. We've uncovered stories of strange discoveries, whispers of lost cities swallowed by jungles, treasures that vanished without a trace, and manuscripts hinting at histories older than empires themselves. We've explored theories ranging from simple accidents of time to deliberate cover-ups from forgotten shipments. Lost at sea to the possibility of knowledge far ahead of its era slipping through our fingers before we could even begin to understand it. And the truth? It's that the British Empire's greatest mysteries are not confined to museums, libraries, or dusty archives. They live on in legends told by local communities, in journals left behind by explorers, in fragments of stone or metal pulled from the earth with no clear explanation. They live on in every question we still can't answer. What knowledge was lost when those cities crumbled? What secrets lie hidden in private collections or beneath layers of soil and time? What stories would those missing manuscripts tell us if only we could find them? Perhaps that's why these mysteries continue to fascinate us, because they remind us that history is never as complete as we think it is. For every empire that rises and falls, there are always pieces of the past that slip away, leaving us with nothing but clues and questions. And maybe, just maybe, the next discovery, the one that rewrites everything, still waits out there, hidden in the shadow of the empire that once claimed to rule the world.